There's a huge difference between having co-founders and solo founders. There's a lot of benefits to being on your own, and there's a lot of benefits to having someone else work with you. Why don't we let's talk about co-founders first, because my first two businesses, I had co-founders. And I think, generally what you're looking for when you're meeting up with a co-founder is someone who's got a complementary skill to you. So for example, if you're particularly good with sales, you might be looking for someone who's particularly good in finance or operations or vice versa. Someone may be an introvert and someone may be more of an extrovert. That's great at the beginning. And I've had that with both of my founders or co-founders, that I've had with. And there's also the sort of wider group where you have 3, 4, 5, 7, 6 co-founders, which I'll touch on in a minute. But 2 co-founders is probably more your traditional. And I think having that complementary skill set so you can both focus on what you're good at is without question fantastic. Having someone you can talk to, being a business owner is without doubt one of the most lonely jobs in the world. It's very hard to talk to other people, even your family, about this, because running a business is a very unique experience. And really the only other people you can talk to are other people that run businesses or co-founders. So massive benefits. I think for me, the problems where co-founders fall apart, and this happens in what I've seen more often than not. Sometimes you get great co-founders who get on all the way through the process. What I found in my experience was that as the business became more successful, those differences in terms of your personality and how you see things start to become more of an issue, because you begin to disagree more. You have success, you have more opportunities, you have more money to do more projects, you have more staff. And suddenly you've got this problem where perhaps one of the co-founders doesn't think one of the staff's pulling their weight, or there's a new project that one co-founder wants to do that the other one doesn't, or someone might want to reinvest the money, someone else might want dividends. And this can be accentuated sometimes by age gaps as well, which is often quite common, where you may have a slightly older co-founder who perhaps brought a lot of the sort of initial capital in, whereas the younger co-founder maybe did some of the work. These little differences that are so good in the beginning become a challenge and can often lead to downfall. One of the co-founders buying them out, which is what happened to myself, or even selling the business too early, which is also what happened to myself. Which is unfortunate because, I think I probably could have done a lot more with both of those businesses if we had kept them longer. But at the time, that was the right decision. So co-founders, I think, are massively beneficial. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't have a co-founder because it's all going to fall apart in the beginning. That's just my experience. What I am suggesting is the importance of getting your shareholders agreement tight and correct. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office and he's saying, what if this happens? And we're sitting there going, that's never going to happen. We're the best of friends. It did happen. And if we hadn't had that shareholders agreement, it would have caused all sorts of problems. So I think, look, go out and find co-founders. Absolutely. Particularly if you're a first-time founder, it really gives you comfort. It gives you someone to talk to. And hopefully you'll have a lot of early success. Just make sure you look further into the future and have a way in your shareholders agreement, or just agree between you on how you're going to deal with those things that would inevitably happen at some point. So that's probably my best advice around co-founders, is really make sure you've got a plan to deal with how things are going to change so that you don't end up in conflict, which can unfortunately be really bad for the business and the staff alike. There's not so many red flags. I think red flags is probably the wrong term. I think people tend to rush into co-founders. I actually am quite interested in something that I haven't really seen a lot of. I haven't actually seen it work at all, is more than 2 co-founders. Inevitably, usually one will drop off somewhere, which again is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think don't go into starting a business with a co-founder or bringing a co-founder in with the romantic idea that it's going to be as wonderful as every other thing that you believe is going to be wonderful in starting a business. Starting and running a business is incredibly hard. And any kind of relationship, whether it be, it is a marriage of sorts, and you need to work at it constantly, and you need to make things work as time goes on, and don't expect it to just continuously work, because it just won't. Things will be tricky and you will have disagreements. So I think you just need to, again, have those clear guidelines. But as for red flags, no, if someone's had 2 or 3 businesses and they've all broken down, actually that sounds like me, and they've all broken down because of their co-founders, then maybe they shouldn't be a co-founder. I don't know. I wouldn't have said there's any red flags, but I think don't go into it lightly, just like you wouldn't go into a marriage or any other kind of long-term relationship lightly. So being a solo founder this time around with Nudge has been wonderful in so many other ways and so difficult in so many ways. Nudge is now coming up to 5 years old. We do a lot of different things with Nudge. Balance the Grind has obviously become part of that, and there's a lot of new things that have happened. Obviously, this is my third business, my fourth if you count the one that I had for a very short period of time that was a disaster. But I think for me, I really enjoyed the creative freedom to be able to do exactly what I wanted in the way that I've wanted. But I've also had the learnings of 2 other businesses with co-founders to bring into that. So if I'd gone out on my own initially, I actually don't know whether I would have succeeded or not. It's an interesting question. I'm pretty sure I would have done okay. I like to back myself, but I'm not 100%. But I think for me, the hardest part I've discovered in being a solo founder or sole founder is loneliness. I wouldn't necessarily call it loneliness. It's everything's on you. Now, I like that. I quite like that. But at the same time, it can be very highly stressful. And, we went through a couple of years in the last 5 that were not great. They weren't great from Nudge's perspective in terms of the funding that a lot of startups were getting. We had to change our products a little bit. The world had, a pandemic. There was a fair bit that we went through. And really, you're making calls that impact a lot of people. I think what people forget is as a business owner, you feel very responsible, not just for your staff, but also your staff's family. Because ultimately, your decisions as to whether that business succeeds or fails will affect them, which will also affect their families. And that can weigh on you a lot. And if you don't have that to share, that load, it can be quite challenging. But I think having had so much experience, probably 12, 13, 14 years running businesses before, probably prepared for that. But I do think that other things you can do is there's plenty of networking clubs out there that you can join. And I think, as I may have mentioned in some of my other posts, if you don't have someone who's run a business before or is running a business, it's very hard for them to understand. It's a bit like trying to talk about having a child if you haven't had a child, or the loss of a parent if you haven't lost a parent. There are certain things in life that are just very difficult to articulate unless you've actually lived them. So I would suggest that if you are a sole founder and you're loving being a sole founder, then join up with some of these clubs, look for ways to network with other business owners and talk about those problems. Because regardless of whether that's a window business, a cooking business, a tech startup business, a hotel business, businesses are the same. The same problems occur. Yes, there's little nuances, but generally they're the same. So my advice is surround yourself with people who are doing what you're doing and understand it. And sure, of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to your family about it, but you need people who genuinely understand the problems. Trying to find a co-founder is possibly one of the most difficult things you can do, because ultimately you are trying to find a relationship. We have helped other founders hire co-founders, but that has usually been in a scenario where the business has been going a while. They have realized they are lacking in something. It might be technology, it might be finance, it might be sales, regardless of what it is. They want to go out and find someone to help them with that, and they want to make them a founder / co-founder to give them skin in the game, or whatever you want to call it. So that's a slightly different scenario because that person's already built part of that business. I think if you're at a very, very early stage, it's probably the people who come up with the idea, who help you formulate the idea. There are programs out there like Techstars and Antler that can help pair you with co-founders. But I think the most advice is to take it as seriously as you really take anything seriously. It is a long-term relationship. You will go through good times, bad times, and horrible times. And you need to be able to be with someone who you can communicate with, who ideally thinks like you but doesn't think like you. And like I said, you need someone who's probably got differences to you, so you both bring different things, but you also need to have similarities or it's going to be a disaster as well. So it's like any relationship. You're essentially looking for a partner, and I think my advice is think of it like that. It's not a Tinder date. This is a long-term relationship. Make sure you look at it that way.